The Exodus is one of the most incredible and fascinating stories in the Bible, but for decades, archaeologists and historians have dismissed it as myth, claiming there isn't any historical data supporting its validity. For many years, even conservative Christians had to struggle with the timeline attached to certain events, especially concerning the fall of Jericho and the destruction of Solomon's temple, that both archaeologists and historians have pinned solid dates to. Whenever archaeologists and historians went to Egypt to find evidence of the Exodus, they always started with this king. We all know him as Ramses, the son of Seti I and ruler of the 19th dynasty. There are two reasons for this. First, the mention of Ramses, the city, in the beginning pages of Exodus. The second, the movie 10 Commandments. Hollywood has ingrained in us that Ramses must be the pharaoh during the Exodus. If Ramses was the king of Egypt during the time of the Exodus, then why can't we find any evidence of it, either in the historical or archaeological evidence in Egypt? And if he wasn't, then we need to look for patterns that fit the Exodus in the history of Egypt. Now, in order to find the truth, we need to find out where the problem started. So let's take a look at this map. This is the French scholar Champollion, who in 1822 deciphered the hieroglyphics on the Rosetta Stone. Now, scholars in the 1800s were extremely well versed in the Bible. So in 1829, he decided, once knowing how to read hieroglyphics, went to Karnak, Egypt, and picked a particular wall at Karnak on the outside of one of the walls. And that wall was called the Bubastite portal. And on it was an inscription of a battle campaign in Canaan. Now, the inscription had a list of about 150 cities in Canaan that were conquered by the Pharaoh. And after reading the inscription on the wall, he found what he thought was something pretty important relating to 2 Chronicles 12, 1-4. And this is what it said. After Rehoboam's position as king was established and he had become strong, he and all Israel with him abandoned the law of the Lord. Because they had been unfaithful to the Lord, Shishak, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, with 1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen, and the innumerable troops of Libyans, Sukkites, and Cushites that came with them from Egypt. He captured the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem. Now, what Champollion thought he found was an inscription on the wall that said Judah ha-Mulkuth, which means Judah the kingdom. He thought, this must be the Shishak, the pharaoh of the Bible. But the pharaoh who inscribed the wall at Karnak, his name was Shoshank. Champollion thought they were one and the same biblical character, the same one who plundered Solomon's temple in Judah. So from this point on begat the synchronization between Shishak and Shoshank. And unfortunately, Pharaoh Shoshank was the Libyan king, founder of the 22nd dynasty, and the conqueror of Rehoboam in his 5th year, and who plundered Solomon's temple. That had become a fixed point in chronology, and it is still used today. So Eric Hornig and David Rohl and several other leading historians had this to say about the date. There remain many uncertainties in the third intermediate period, as critics such as David Rohl have rightly maintained. Even our basic premise of the 925 BC for Shoshank's campaign to Jerusalem is not built on solid foundation. Now, because of the misinterpretation of the two kings, historians and archaeologists use the 925 BC date as the biblical date for the 5th year of King Rehoboam. And because of that, you cannot fix Shoshank to that date, because the biblical Shishak is not the Pharaoh Shoshank that's inscribed the campaign on the wall. The reason this becomes so critical and so important to history, and biblical history especially, is because scholars base Holy Land chronology entirely upon Egyptian history because of how preserved their historical documents and archaeological finds are, due to the climate in Egypt, that it's so dry, and apparently the salt content in the ground and stuff like that keeps everything so well preserved. As a matter of fact, not just biblical history, but most history of the ancient world is based off of Egyptian history. So then if Egypt chronology ends up wrong, everything else is wrong. So now here we got Egyptologists use the Bible to date the start of the 22nd dynasty to 945 BC. Then they date Ramses II based on that 22nd dynasty date. They then find no evidence for the Exodus and the conquest in the time of Ramses, go figure. They therefore reject the Bible as a work of pious fiction. So the Bible is used to establish Egyptian chronology, which then is used to dismiss the Bible. And I think there's something else at work here on top of that, which I'll get into later. Okay, so here we have it. Was Ramses the Pharaoh during the time of the Exodus? And what we have here in the next slide is called the Merneptah stele, or the Israel stele. And this stele is one of the most important steles in all of Egypt, for the fact that it mentions Israel on the bottom. And it actually says, Israel is laid waste, his seed is no more. Now Merneptah was the successor to Ramses II. And when he took the throne, he was already of old age, since his father Ramses ruled the kingdom for over 66 years. When he took the throne, he was too old to do anything. So he had one of his scribes make this stele of his entire dynasty's accomplishments, and then he signed the bottom of it. And this next slide I put up just for the fact that it's from the Institute of Biblical and Scientific Studies, and you can see I highlighted it, and it says, before the discovery of the Merneptah stele, scholars placed the date of the Exodus and entry into Canaan much later. They are now forced to admit that Israel was already in Canaan at the time of the Merneptah, Israel was big and strong enough to challenge Egypt in battle. This date puts the kibosh on the 1210 BC for the Exodus. So the Merneptah stela indicates a nation of Israel already existing in the 19th dynasty. And if Moses and Ramses were contemporaries, how can that be? It can't. So the final thing I'm going to show here is a piece of a statue called the Berlin Tablet. And it was found by an archaeologist in the basement of the museum in Berlin, and it had been rotting away there for many, many years. And the 3 circular cartouches on the bottom are names of cities. And the first one says Ashkelon, the second one is Canaan, and the third one that is partially broken, and they were able to put it back together, is Israel. And this statue was created in the 18th dynasty, 100 years before Ramses, which is proof positive that Israel was a nation in the 18th dynasty, and Ramses could not have been the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Okay, so if Ramses is not the king during the Exodus, who was? And in order to find out, we're going to need to go to this place, which is Jericho. And this is where we begin our search for the right Pharaoh. Now, most scholars place the destruction of Jericho around 1210 BC. But biblical scholars say, well, that can't be right, because the Bible says something completely different. The Bible places the destruction of Jericho about 200 years earlier, at around 1450 BC. So when was Jericho destroyed? Alright, I'm going to put up a quote made by John McCarthy, who was who was a reporter during the hostage crisis, and he was taken hostage, and during the time he was a hostage, all he had to read was the Bible, and he became very fascinated with the Exodus. And when he got out, since he was a reporter, he went around to all kinds of scholars in the area and asked them when they thought the Exodus happened. And he kept getting over and over the same answer, that it never happened. So he went and made a mini-series called It Ain't Necessarily So. And this is a quote from him. When the site of Jericho was reworked in the 50s, it was discovered that the walls had fallen down long before Joshua and his people were supposed to have arrived, and that at that time Jericho was almost certainly unoccupied. The conquest of the promised land by the children of Israel began to evaporate into thin, hazy air. Alright, so this chart up now will have, if we look at it, on the far right has the archaeology, the center, Egypt's history, and on the far left, Jericho, the city. So if we look across at the archaeology, we have the late Bronze 2A time, the late Bronze 2B, Iron Age 1, and Iron Age 1A and 1B. And if we put in it currently the sojourn at this time in the late Bronze 2H, Moses and the Exodus in the late Bronze 2B, early Judges 1A, and late Judges 1B. And then we add in Egypt's dynasties. As you can see, we have Akhenaten in the late 18th dynasty, Ramses II in the 19th, Ramses III, the 20th, and then the late 20th dynasty and the 21st dynasty. And then over here at Jericho, we have in the 1158 range, we have a town. And then at the bottom, there was a house found, and during this time about 20 people lived in it or so for a short period of time. And then in the middle, there's a huge gap of time where nothing happened. There was nothing. It was just blank. So if we put Moses in the Exodus, and then we put 40 years later Joshua's conquest, you can see where the problem lies. There was nothing at Jericho for Joshua to conquer. So now you have a visual of the archaeology, the Egyptian history, the dates, and you see the problem that we have to contend with. And this is the conventional line of thought. And again, as a result of this mantra, here we have one of the top archaeologists in Israel, Finkelstein, speaking about early Israel. There was no mass exodus from Egypt. There was no violent conquest of Canaan. Something clearly doesn't add up when the biblical account and the archaeological evidence and the Egyptian records are placed side by side. This statement is true. What scholars and archaeologists do is take the historical evidence, the archaeological evidence, to be fact, and throw away the Bible as a matter of pure fiction. Then on top of that, you get people like Rabbi David Rohl, who's the #1 rabbi in the United States. And here's an excerpt of an interview that he did. And just listen to what he says.
What part of the Torah would you grant to be based upon historical reality?
I can't tell you. I don't know. And although it may irk people, I don't care.
If the leading scholars agree with the most outspoken atheists and agnostics, if even some rabbis agree with the most skeptical archaeologists that there's no evidence at all that the Exodus ever really happened, then what are the rest of us supposed to think? If none of it happened, then the two religions of the Bible, Judaism and Christianity, are both based on a gigantic lie.
So here we have a rabbi telling his congregation that it doesn't matter if the Bible's true or not. Just take its moral teachings and don't worry about whether the base the foundation of the text is true. And personally, I find this absolutely shocking. How can a teacher of the Word of God, let alone any other text or history, not have a foundation, a base of belief, of faith? It just blows my mind. So the academic conclusion from all this, as there is no archaeological evidence to confirm or even support the stories of the Old Testament, it is logical to conclude that the Bible is a work of fiction. And that's the bottom line here. And this is why we have to show and prove that it really did happen, the way the Bible said it happened. Now, if we take our events in order, as shown on this wall here, we need to look into Egypt's history and see where they actually do match up. And as we've shown already, if we take the 1210 BC date, which is the 19th dynasty, the time of Ramses, there is no match. And if we look at the other scholars who claim the 1450 BC date, which was derived from the Solomon Temple, 945 BC, add 480 years to that, and you roughly get 1450 date. And the 18th dynasty, there's still no match. So now we need to take these events and look into Egypt's history and see if we can match up these events. So let's go back to our chart here and take a look and see if we could find the Jericho that was destroyed by fire and the walls came crumbling down. And if we look into the Middle Bronze 2B, that city has shown exactly that it was heavily burnt, the walls came crashing down, it was left abandoned for centuries. So let's take a closer look at this Jericho and see what we find. We have also taken our date of the Exodus and the conquest, moved it from the late Bronze Age to the Middle Bronze Age, and working backwards from there. So we have moved the sequence of events, the whole era. Alright, so let's go back to the beginning. We all know the story of Joseph and his brothers, how they sold him into slavery, and how he interpreted Pharaoh's dream of the cows, the fat cows, and the 7 lean cows. How he rose to power. Later on, Moses comes into the picture, the Exodus, and then Joshua with the conquest of Canaan. So, now that we've moved the destruction of Jericho to the Middle Bronze 2B period, because that's what the evidence shows, we push back the arrival of the Israelites into the 12th dynasty, followed by the slavery, Moses, the Exodus, and the beginning of the conquest of Jericho, into the 13th dynasty, followed by the Hyksos period. And the Hyksos were a group of invaders, very brutal during that time period, and they ruled over Egypt for a couple of centuries, killing their kings, their queens, and everything else. And that was Egypt's punishment for enslaving the Israelite people. All right, so now that we moved our timeline, let's go back to the Bible and check out the next sequence of events. And Joseph placed his father and brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And if we go to a map and see where Ramses is, it's on the eastern part of the Nile Delta in the land of Goshen. And during the Middle Bronze Age, underneath the city of Ramses is a city that's called Avaris. And this is what the region would have looked like back then. I thought I'd give a little information about it. The Exodus starting point. Archaeology has confirmed location at modern Tel El Daba, or Avaris. The Pelusiac branch of the Nile River flowed past the site, giving access to the Mediterranean. The town lay on the land route to Canaan, the famous Horus Road, which is most likely the route that Joseph's family took to come there when the drought occurred and Joseph invited them. Also, the reason for the discrepancy in the names are, in the Bible, it actually says a place called Ramses, not the city Ramses. And though the Pharaoh Ramses founded the city of Ramses, he built it on top of Avaris. So the Bible is not talking about a place, a city, as much as it's talking about a place. Because when it was written, people would have known it as Ramses and not Avaris. Now this picture here shows what Avaris would have looked like, and up closer to the river you could see that would have been the Egyptian portion of the city. And if you look down, you'll see the large palace right up against the river. And you could even imagine that farther down, let's say Moses' house was down near the end down there, and when she set the baby into the water, you could see how it would float right on by the palace. And he picked up. And then the darker colored homes are all the Israelites, the Semitic tribe homes at Avaris. So the conclusion here, the Middle Bronze II city of Avaris is the only real candidate for the era and location of the Israelite sojourn as handed down in the biblical tradition. Avaris is the only place that, and anywhere in Egypt, that fits the description in the Bible. It's the only place where a Semitic tribe came in, flourished, they became slaves, then there was a major disaster, and the town was abandoned. This is now a typical grave site at Avaris. It's not Egyptian, it's Semitic. This is inside one of the graves. Egyptians bury on their backs, and Semitic people, Jewish, bury on their sides. This is some of the items found inside the graves. The pottery is Canaanite, and they can also date exactly by the pottery. And these are weapons which are not Egyptian, they're also Semitic. These are donkey buried in front of a grave. Some of the more affluent people were carted to their gravesite by donkey, then their throats were slit, and the donkey were buried in front of their gravesite. And boxed in the picture are two sheep, which they did bone analysis on and found them to be long-haired sheep from northern Syria, exactly the place where the patriarchs would have came from. And as we all know, the Israelites were shepherds. All right, now we're going to move on to Joseph. And this next frame is the only time in Egypt where we start finding Semitic art. And you can obviously see that they are wearing colored coats. Okay, and these are the two pharaohs of the time period. Senuseret III and Amenemhat III, the father and son, father on the left. And if you notice their faces, out of all the statues of pharaohs in Egypt, these two are the only ones that look absolutely miserable. And there's a reason for it. This is Genesis 41, 17 through 24. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat of shed, and well favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill, favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good, and behold, 7 ears, withered thin, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And this was the dream that Joseph was charged to interpret. Now every year, the waters come down the Nile and flood the delta. And that's how the farmers water their agriculture in that region. Now what's really cool is during Amenemhat III's reign, he started recording the water level of the Nile, the flood stages. And if you look at the chart here, you could see the water levels during each year of his reign. And what's truly amazing is you could see the 2 boxes in this chart, and it shows a little bit more water than average, which would be the 7 fat years, year 9 through 16. And then you see in the red box the lean years, because the Nile flooded 4 times its normal water level, which made it impossible to plant crops. Genesis 45:6. For this is the 2nd year there has been famine in the country, and there's still 5 years to come without plowing or harvest. Now to add a little bit more validity to it, what's highlighted is without plowing, you could still plant and plow if it was a drought, but it would be impossible to plow and plant if there was a flood. So during Amenemhat III's reign, what does Joseph do about the flooding situation? Well, he builds this reservoir, and it's made to divert 50% of the Nile's floodwaters. The red line you see is a canal tying into the Nile. And this is called the Fayum solution. And the canal is called Bar Yusuf, or the waterway of Joseph. And it is still called that today. The Pharaoh was so pleased with this solution that he said it was his greatest achievement during his reign. Genesis 41:39-40. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has given you knowledge of all this, there can be no one as intelligent and as wise as you. You shall be my chancellor, and all my people shall respect your orders. Only this throne shall set me above you." So as we know, Pharaoh makes Joseph second in command of all of Egypt. And after Joseph does his duty for kingdom and country, he retires in Goshen, where he lives to a ripe old age. And we pick up in Genesis 50:24. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land, to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." So let's see if we could find Joseph in Avaris. So in order to find Joseph, we need to start with Jacob. And in this field, the Austrian archaeologists found a house. And this is a reconstruction of the house they found. The style of this house is Syrian, and an Egyptian would never build a house like this. But a patriarch like Jacob would. And after the resident of this house had passed away, a palace was built literally on top of it. This is a picture of the palace. And the cool thing is, in front are 12 pillars. And how many brothers did Joseph have? 12. And this is the backyard, and there's 12 tombs. And one of them was a pyramid. And this is the archaeologists excavating the area where the pyramid was, and the two artifacts that are highlighted, I'll show you a close-up of what those are. And this is one of them. This is, the head of a sculpture, and you could clearly see how it was completely defaced, and even a large chunk off the top of the head. But what's interesting is the mushroom-style hair and the throw stick portion on his shoulder, which indicates not an Egyptian, but a Semitic person. Here's another angle of the headshot, and the strange thing about it was it has flaming red hair, and the skin color is yellow, which is definitely not an Egyptian person. And again, the straight combed hair into the mushroom shape The next photograph here is a picture of the foot, which you can see the definite color pattern. And as we know, Egyptians didn't wear clothes like this. And in the Bible, Joseph wore a colored coat. So to summarize it, we have an individual in a pyramid tomb, and during this period of time, nobody but pharaohs had pyramids. The statue is twice the size of a normal human being. So he's a high official. He's got yellow skin, mushroom-style hair, wearing a multicolored coat. And this last picture is a reconstruction of it, and down the center, it actually says Joseph. So now let's move on and see who was the Pharaoh that raised Moses. Let's take a look at Exodus 1, 8 through 11. Then there came to power in Egypt a new king who did not know Joseph. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites are now more numerous and stronger than we are. We must take action to stop them from multiplying, or if war should break out, they might join forces with our enemies. They might take up arms against us and then escape from the country. Accordingly, they put taskmasters over the Israelites to wear them down by forced labor. This is the starting point for Moses. Now, something they found very interesting was they found hundreds of infants buried at the site, more than any other site they've ever dug around. Most sites they've dug up in the ancient world, the mortality rate for infants is around 25%. At Avaris, it is huge. It is at 50%, more than double of any other ancient site. Something else that they found very interesting was the ratio between girls to boys. The majority of the infants were male. So there was a Jewish historian named Artapanus, and he had wrote a book about the history of the Jews, and his work ended up into the archives at Alexandria. But later on, the Christians came into Alexandria and burnt it to the ground, and unfortunately his work was lost. But luckily, there were some other historians that took excerpts from his book, and we were able to, he actually wrote who the name of the Pharaoh was that raised Moses, and his name in Greek was Kenafres. And if you translate that into Egyptian, his name ends up being Kenefre. And there was only 2 kings in all of Egypt that had this name, Kenefre Sobektetop the 4th, and one was in the very old kingdom, which doesn't matter. And this is a picture of him. He was the 29th ruler of the 13th dynasty. Here's a picture of the site, and he would probably have his palace there, right on the edge of the water, as you can see. And you could imagine Moses' mother setting Moses afloat down the river, and it would end up right at the palace where the princess would have picked him up and brought him in and raised him. And here we have a fragment of the royal canon of Turin, which is a king's list, the pharaohs. And here we have the last sub-dynasty, the pharaohs that enslaved the Israelites. We have a piece of papyrus there with Semitic slave names on it. And then we have Sebahotep IV, the stepfather of Moses. And then when he died, we look back on the papyrus, we go back 45 years, and we come down to this small piece of fragment, and we read the 40th king, Didymos. This is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Basically a nobody. And he is also the last king of the 13th dynasty. And then we have this, Manetho, who was an Egyptian priest who wrote about the history of the Egyptians. And this is quoted by Josephus, who is a Jewish historian. Ptolemaeus, which is Greek for Didymos, in his reign, for what cause I know not, a blast of God smote us. And you could see how God is not plural, it's singular. And remember, this is an Egyptian writing, so you would expect God to be gods, plural. Then he continues, and unexpectedly, from the regions of the east, invaders of obscure race marched in confidence of victory against our land. By main force, they easily seized it without striking a blow, and having overpowered the rulers of the land, they then burned our cities ruthlessly, razed to the ground the temples of the gods, and treated all the natives with a cruel hostility, massacring some and leading into slavery the wives and children of others. This is the punishment. This is post-Exodus. This is the Hyksos coming into Egypt and invading it. They were able to come into Egypt without striking a blow and taking it over. And the reason for that is because Pharaoh and his army are under the sea. And at this very same time, back at Avaris, the Austrians archaeologists found these bodies just thrown into pits. And you can see how they're just strewn all over the place. And what the archaeologists there said was there was a terrible plague, and they had to rush and do emergency burials in fear of contamination. And what followed afterwards was the entire place was abandoned and left empty. And we're not sure how long it was left abandoned, but they think it was about 5 years or so. And then the Hyksos came in and just bulldozed the place over and built a mortuary to bury their kings there. So now we take a look at the graph again, and we know that Ramses II was not the pharaoh of the Exodus. We moved the timeline down for the Exodus to the 13th dynasty, and now we need to look and see if Jericho was destroyed right after the 13th dynasty. Now, I'm not going to cover the wilderness just yet, but we're going to jump ahead here and look at the conquest of Canaan by Joshua. So let's look back at our chart here, and let's look at that Middle Bronze 2B city and see if it fits what the Bible says about Jericho. So we know from historical records the town of 1A, 1B was built by Hiel in the time of Ahab, circa 800 BC. And we need to look at this Middle Bronze 2B city and see if it fits with the destruction of Jericho in the Bible. So we know this city's walls collapsed, was heavily burnt, and the site was abandoned. We also know that this is the time of King Dudamos, and the gap would be the result of the Exodus and God's judgment on Israel. Joshua 20 and 26. When the people heard the sound of the trumpet, they raised a mighty war cry, and the wall of Jericho collapsed then and there. At once the people stormed the city, each man going straight forward, and they captured the city. At that time Joshua made them take this oath before Yahweh: Accursed before Yahweh be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city. On his firstborn will he lay its foundations. On his youngest son will he set up its gates. And we know this is exactly what happened with Hail and the Iron Age 1A city. He built the city on the foundations of his two sons, exactly as the Bible says. So this is the actual city of Jericho from an aerial view. And this is Kathleen Kenyon, who excavated Jericho in the 50s. And she ended up digging a large trench and ended up finding the wall of Jericho that fell. And also found that it was heavily burnt. And this is a rendering of what she discovered, that there was a retaining wall, a lower wall, an earthen embankment, and the upper wall. And what she found was that the upper wall had collapsed and rolled down the hill and smashed into the lower wall, and that came tumbling down. And also that, like I said, that the place was heavily burnt. And when the archaeologists excavated the homes at Jericho, they found lots of clay jars filled with grain. And this tells us when the siege took place. It took place at Passover, when the harvest is brought in. It also tells us that the siege wasn't a long time, because all the jars were full. And of course the Bible tells us that it took 7 days. Okay, so let's go back now to a city called Hazor. It was the foremost of the kingdoms in Canaan, and it was ruled by a king called Jabin. Joshua 11:10 and 11. Joshua then turned back and captured Hazor, putting its king Jabin to the sword. Hazor in olden days was the foremost of the kingdoms. In compliance with the curse of destruction, they put every living creature to the sword. Not a living soul was left, and Hazor was burnt to the ground. So Hazor suffers the same fate as Jericho. And what's really important is when they were excavating it, they found a tablet. This tablet was written in cuneiform. It was written by some officials, and what's key is that it was written to the king of a Middle Bronze 2-age city there, and his name was Jabin. The same name, same king that Joshua thrusted his sword through. I'm going to wrap up with Joseph now, And this is the Great Migdal Temple. And in the center is the temple to Baal Berith, not the evil Baal that everybody worshipped back then, but this is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if we take another angle of it, in front of the temple is a great white stone, as you can see. It's a reconstruction of the temple and the standing stone with the oak tree, which Joshua set up. And what happened about 100 years later, this was burnt down to the ground by an evil king called Abimelech. And if we go back to the Bible, Judges 9:45 through 49. All that day Abimelech attacked the town. He stormed it and slaughtered the people inside, razed the town, and sowed it with salt. On hearing this, all the leading men inside Migdal Shechem took refuge in the crypt of the temple of Baal Berith. Abimelech's men piled branches over the crypt and set fire over those who were inside, so that all the people in Migdal Shechem died too, about 1,000 men and women. What does archaeology show us? This is exactly what happened 100 years later, just as the Bible said. This stone is one of the most important artifacts of the Bible. Joshua 24:25 through 28. That day Joshua made a covenant for the people. He laid down a statute and an ordinance for them at Shechem. Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of Yahweh. He then took a large stone and set it up there, under the oak tree, in Yahweh's sanctuary. Joshua then dismissed the people, everyone to his own heritage. What's amazing is the Israelis don't recognize it. Archaeologists and historians don't recognize it, all because it's 300 years too early. But it's so obvious what it is. Now, if we go back to our wall here of time, and we move everything down to the Middle Kingdom and summarize this, we have the arrival, then the multiplication of the Israelite people, we have evidence of the slavery, we have the Exodus, we have the punishment of Egypt with the Hyksos coming in, we have the conquest, and everything fits exactly as the Bible said it did. And our date has been moved down to the Exodus of 1650 BC. Now that we've shown very solid evidence that the Exodus did occur and that archaeologists and historians just had the date wrong, let's take a look back and see if there's any evidence of Moses, the 10 plagues, and the wandering through the wilderness, and then up to Mount Sinai, where he collected the 10 commandments from God. Exodus 6. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Now shalt thou see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand shall he let them go, and with a strong hand shall he drive them out of his land. And God spake unto Moses, and said unto him, I am the Lord, and I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, by the name of God Almighty. But by my name, Jehovah, was I not known to them. And I have also established my covenant with them, to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage, wherein they were strangers. And I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under your burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm, and with great judgments. And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God, which bringeth you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you in unto the land concerning the which I did swear to give it to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a heritage. I am the Lord. And Moses spake unto the children of Israel, but they hearkened not unto Moses for anguish of spirit, and for cruel bondage. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Go in, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that he let the children of Israel go out of his land. Exodus 7:14. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, he refuseth to let the people go. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. Lo, he goeth out unto the water, and thou shalt stand by the river's bank against he come. And the rod which was turned to a serpent shalt thou take in thine hand, and thou shalt say unto him, The Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent me unto thee, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hereto thou wilt not hear. Thus said the Lord, In this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Take thy rod, and stretch it out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so, as the Lord commanded. And he lifted up the rod, and smote the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river. And there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt, And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them, as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. And all the Egyptians digged around about the river for the water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. Now that was Exodus 7. This was the first plague against the Egyptian Pharaoh in Egypt. And interestingly enough, there is an Egyptian account of this plague, and it is called the Ipuwer papyrus. And this is it right here. The Ipuwer papyrus manuscript is an Egyptian poem, officially designated as the Papyrus of Leiden, or the Admonitions of Ipuwer. A Dutchman by the name of Giovanni Anastasi purchased the Ipuwer papyrus in 1828 and subsequently turned it over to the Dutch National Museum of Antiquities. And it is an Egyptian account of the plagues. And the first one that it speaks about is what I just read out of Exodus, the plague of the blood. And this is what it says. Plague is throughout the land. Blood is everywhere. The river is blood. Men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water. That is our water. That is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruin. The next plague that the papyrus speaks about is the fifth plague. And we'll go back to Exodus and we will read Exodus 9. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, and tell him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if thou refuse to let them go, and wilt hold them still, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle, which is in the field, upon thy horses, upon the asses, upon the camels, upon the oxen, and upon the sheep. There shall be a very grievous murrain, and the Lord shall sever between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt, and there shall nothing die of all that is the children's of Israel. And the Lord appointed a set time, saying, Tomorrow the Lord shall do this thing in the land. And the Lord did that thing on the morrow, and all the cattle of Egypt died. But of the cattle of the children of Israel died not one. And the Pharaoh sent, and behold, there was not one of the cattle of the Israelites dead. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. And the papyrus reads, All animals, their hearts weep, cattle moan. Behold, cattle are left to stray, and there is none to gather them together. The next plague we'll look at is the seventh plague, the plague of hail. Exodus 9:13. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For I will at this time send all my plagues upon thy heart, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, that thou mayest know that there is none like me in all the earth. For now I will stretch out my hand, that I may smite thee and thy people with pestilence, and thou shalt be cut off from the earth. And in every deed for thus cause have I raised thee up, for to show in thee my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. As yet exaltest thou thyself against my people, that thou wilt not let them go? Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such hath not been seen in Egypt since the foundation thereof, and even until now. Send therefore now, and gather thy cattle, and all that thou hast in the field, for upon every man and beast which shall be found in the field, and shall not be brought home, the hail shall come down upon them, and they shall die. He that feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his cattle flee into the houses. And he that regarded not the word of the Lord left his servants and his cattle in the field. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch forth thine hand toward heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, upon every man, and upon beast, and upon every herb of the field throughout the land of Egypt. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. And the Ipur papyrus reads, Forsooth, gates, columns, and walls are consumed by fire. Lower Egypt weeps. The entire palace is without its revenues. To it belong by right wheat and barley, geese and fish. Forsooth, grain has perished on every side. Forsooth, that has perished, which was yesterday seen. The land is left over to the weariness like the cutting of flax. Okay, and the next plague to compare is the plague of darkness, Exodus 10:22 and 23. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thy hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Then the papyrus reads, The land is without light. Okay, and the final comparison between the papyrus and the Bible is Exodus 12:29, the death of the firstborn. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And the papyrus reads, Forsooth, the children of princes are dashed against its walls. Forsooth, the children of princes are cast out in the streets. The prison is ruined. He who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. It is groaning throughout the land, mingled with lamentations. Remember, this was written by an Egyptian from his perspective, and also the timing of this papyrus is written around the same time as the Exodus, 1650 BC. Now I want to step back to something we covered earlier. We go back to Avaris, to the grave pits that the Austrian archaeologists found bodies just strewn all over the place haphazardly. And according to them, it was because of a plague, and they had to rush burial because of contamination. So to me, that solidifies the plagues. The next event that I'd like to go over is the route that the Israelites took to get to the Red Sea and cross it. I have a map here that's showing the route, the proposed route, and I have a segment of film here that, if you watch, matches exactly what the Bible
So it says in Exodus 14,
describes.
they're tangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in. So Exodus is telling us they're going through the Wadi Watur, they feel all shut in, they're entangled, they're winding their way through these narrow mountains. And
for those who argue a different crossing point, that verse would not make sense.
Right.
Where are they going to be
Right.
literally entangled?
yes, and you can see how steep it is. Very steep there. We saw it up there. And again, very narrow. You're not going to go over top of these mountains. But Josephus said, "For there was on each side a ridge of mountains that terminated at the sea, which were impassable by reason of their roughness, and obstructed their flight." So again, he is agreeing with what the Bible is saying about the mountains.
And even with more detail that would further
that it's
prove.
terminating at the sea. And here we're getting closer to the exit point, closer to the beach where they'll come to a stop. In the distance are the end of the mountains. And this is the end of the Wadi Watur. You can see here where it's washed out recently.
Now, had you wondered,
So here we're getting closer to the exit point of the Wadi. In the distance is the beach, and past that we can see in the distance now the water of the Gulf of Aqaba.
now there's something on that beach modern, is there not? There's some kind of, there's some buildings there.
There is, and we'll see that, yes. So there's the Wadi we traveled through. We're now at the beach at Nuweiba. And now we're going to show you the second way to get to the beach, and this would be from Israel. Here's Eilat. It's Saturday evening. The day is ending, and the next morning we're going to head out through the Israeli exit point and then go over into the Egyptian, heading south about 50 miles, heading down to Nuweiba. And
This is the Israeli way.
this is from Israel, yes.
Okay.
You can get to it from Israel. And on the left, we can see the waters of the Gulf of Aqaba. So I'm here in the back seat. You see the water
Oh, there it is there, yeah.
on the left, the Gulf of Aqaba. That is the Yam Suf, or Red Sea, spoken of in the Bible. There is the Pharaoh's Island, built in the 11th century by the Crusaders. I guess they were controlling movement through the area. It's a very interesting castle. And here in Egypt, things are poorer compared to Israel, but a lot of vacant buildings, a lot of unemployed. But we're continuing to head south.
Now, when was this video shot?
This was November of 2016.
Okay, so this is after all the unrest and the Arab Spring
Yes,
and all the rest of it.
yes. And then there's Nuweiba, jutting out into the water, 5 miles long, 3 miles across. So it's large enough to hold 3 million people.
That is larger than one imagines seeing the photos from
Yes.
the aerial view.
In the background there is the Wadi Watur we came out of, emptied out onto the beach here. This is from our hotel. And you can see the Wadi Watur right there.
So this is what, minus the buildings, of course, this is what the Israelites saw.
Yes,
When they
some-
looked back and saw the
yeah.
Egyptians coming.
Some have called this Piharoth, mouth of the hole or canyon, which is, it's a major point to make note of because you're exiting the mountains. So it may be Piharoth. And then here is sunrise the next morning. You can see the beautiful mountains over there in Saudi Arabia and the sun coming up over the mountains. So very interesting. It's nice to be right there at the Red Sea crossing. And here we're panning across. You can see the mountains of Saudi Arabia.
So that's where they are going, but they have no idea how they're going to get
How
across.
they're
Can
gonna
you
do it.
imagine being on that beach, looking
Yes.
at that, saying, Moses, what have you done? No wonder they thought that we're
Yes,
dead.
right. But of course, Moses had full faith in God, that God would do something. He didn't know exactly what. But so here we are taking a look, heading, that's a viewing to the north. Our guide went up there
Ah,
at
okay.
Nuweiba. And you can see the poor area of town, the Bedouins living.
Now this is the pillar that has been eroded over time, not
Yes.
the ones that the Saudis found on the other side, which was pretty much intact.
Right, this will be the Egyptian pillar we're heading toward. And it was found lying in the water. Here we can see it in the distance next to the road in the center of the video.
Oh, there it is erected there. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Ron Wyatt showed it to the authorities in 1978. The Israelis were occupying the Sinai Peninsula. He showed it to them. They brought it back from the water's edge and set it up in concrete, which was very nice. So today you can go there and stand beside this pillar
And that's all thanks to Ron Wyatt.
Yeah,
Essentially.
and Solomon, who erected it to start with.
Of course, yeah.
So the matching column on the Saudi Arabian side had Hebrew writing on it still when Ron found it in 1984 that said Solomon, Pharaoh, Yahweh, Death, Mizraim, which means Egypt, water, Edom. So this was a marker marking the Red Sea crossing spot.
And someone has made their own markings on it.
Yes, unfortunately, but modern graffiti. But Solomon's seaport, Elath, was 50 miles to the north there at modern day Eilat. And so Solomon, this was his area, this was his neighborhood. And so 400 years after the fact, he had these columns erected to mark the spot of the Red Sea crossing. He knew full well where this event took place.
So that must have been passed down from family to family.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
So it's a 16-foot red granite Phoenician-style column. Beautiful.
And there's obviously no writing on there. That's all been washed off now.
The back side of it has been eroded away. It doesn't look this nice, and that's where probably some writing was.
But that's a solid piece of granite. That's not like
Yes.
the Sodom and Gomorrah limestone that we saw. This is
Right.
It's
This is very solid red granite. It's very beautiful. So from here, we can get a look at where this is in relation to the water. It's set back, the water's a couple hundred yards away.
and this is the beach here essentially.
Yeah, this is the crossing area right here where the water actually opened up.
Wow.
Yes, it's amazing to stand here.
Now, is there a definite place on the other side that we can match up as to where
Yes.
from the beach?
The column that was cut down in Saudi Arabia, the base of it is still there.
Oh, okay.
So if you line these up, it's 13 miles across the water. Yes. So we're traveling through the local Bedouin village here. But up to the north, before we head down to the crossing site, up to the north is Migdal, or fortress, that is at the narrowest point where the water and mountains come together, is this fortress. And I imagine it was designed to limit the travelers going up and down through the beach there, heading north or south. And so this was some type of Egyptian fortress designed to control movement through the area. And inside the fort here, they had a nice well dug that would serve the soldiers here in the nice fort. And so some of the locals were following us in here, and they were showing us this well that the soldiers would have used.
And some kid sitting precariously on the edge.
Yeah, I'm afraid they might fall in there. And so we can look down and we can see a little bit of the water. And so that would have served them. So this was probably Migdal. And now we're getting ready to head back south to the actual crossing site. And here you can see the beach where the waters opened up. We're standing at the exact spot.
Wow.
Yes, and the mountains of Saudi Arabia in the distance.
Did your knees get weak sitting there? Was it an awesome thing
It was
to behold?
quite incredible, yes, to be there. And so in the foreground, right in front of us here, is a melted beach where the sand and the stones were literally melted together like concrete.
Really?
This is not loose sand. This is a melted beach which the pillar of fire created when it stood here. So,
Separating the Egyptian army from
Yeah.
the fleeing Israelites.
yeah. So again, this is more evidence, that confirms the location
My
here.
goodness. Now, how did you find out about that?
I had heard about it, and then I saw it myself, So here it is. You see this rock is just infused in with the sand and the little rocks there. And this is all hardened. This is like concrete.
That is amazing.
Jason here is stepping on it. It's very solid. This is a different area.
How did the locals explain this?
I asked the hotel owner was here with us that we know, and he says, I've never seen this before. He said his hotel's in a different area, but he was amazed at what he saw. So
Well, there's the evidence right there. It's solid.
right. And so the piece of it was broken off for us to look at, and you can see up close here all the little rocks and the sand. They're melted together, infused by the pillar of fire. And this goes on for some ways. This isn't just one little spot. And so Ron Wyatt went scuba diving out there, and various things have been found in the water. You can see human femur bone that is coral encrusted, which would be something you would expect. And on the left here we see a normal one. On the right you see the coral encrusted femur from one of the soldiers. On the top left you see a human rib cage stuck in the coral.
Now, what about people who say, "Oh, this is table coral"? It's
not, because it has metal in it. And so here's a horse's hoof that's shriveled up when they took it out of the water. It's shriveled up. So again, we have horse parts, human parts.
What are we seeing here? What is this coral?
And so this is coral standing on an axle, and it has a raised center hub with spokes going outwards. Here's another round chariot with a raised center hub and then spokes going out, and it's got a round shape to it. Again, it's covered in coral.
Do some people say that these are just modern shipwrecks?
Some people have said that, but again, this agrees totally with the design of the chariot wheels. With a raised center hub and using metal detectors, there is metal in the center. There are spokes going out. This is a 4-spoke wheel with 3 spokes left. 4-spoke wheels, 6-spoke wheels, and 8-spoke wheels are found here. Of course, using the metal detector, like he's demonstrating here, all of the hubs here contain metal, and that is the design of the Egyptian chariot wheel with the metal center hub. Now here is a gold-plated wheel. There were 600 choice chariots used in the Exodus, we're told, so you would expect to find 1,200 chariot wheels here with gold. And this one is special. It's gold-plated, and 2 or 3 of these were found by Mr. Wyatt. Now we see a more shallow area where the Red Sea crossing took place. It's shallower here compared to the north and compared to the south. It's still deep. It has to be a deep area. It's 2,800 feet deep, but that gives you a 4% grade, which is manageable. Over in Saudi Arabia, you see the remains of the pillar that was found there on the Saudi Arabian side. It was cut down by the Saudi authorities. It had Hebrew writing on it. We don't know where it is. But there in the Saudi waters, Viveka Ponton went scuba diving, and she found this beautiful chariot wheel in the Saudi Arabian waters. So you have chariot parts on the Egyptian side, chariot parts on the Saudi Arabian side.
But it's not the crossing site. It couldn't be.
That's what the critics would say. But the evidence is here. It's real. So we rented a boat and went out with a Rove, a remote operated vehicle, had a 100-foot tether, and so we were going to do some little inspecting ourselves.
So this is a submarine camera?
Yes, for a few hours, and we didn't have days and weeks to do this, but we had a few hours. We rented the nice boat here to take off. We headed down toward the south end of the beach. We're headed toward that area, and you can see the waters extending over to Saudi Arabia in the distance. And
so were you stopped by the Saudi authorities like Leonard Muller was?
Sometimes they do, yeah. If they suspect you, they'll come over and see what you're up to. But so now we're in the approximate area, and we're gonna throw the drone into the water.
So you closest to which land is that?
We're close to Egypt.
Close
here,
to Egypt.
Saudi, Sinai Peninsula. So we're getting it ready for another launching here. So here's the camera. It's got 3 propellers, and it's giving us a live feed back up into the boat. And so that day we were able to see something. I looked around, but we couldn't confirm that it was a chariot wheel. So here we're launching it, and then here's an instant replay on board the Rove. The Rove's videoing this, and so we're down in the water.
So where you are is not that deep where you are right here.
Right,
close
it's
to
not that deep, yes. And so you can see some coral parts here.
But again, coral doesn't grow on sand. There has to be something for it to grow on.
Something, yes.
So obviously there has to be something down there.
Yes.
But this area is very remote. I wouldn't imagine that it's, pieces from from modern humans, because why would they be there? There's nothing there.
Yes. So some of these objects here may be from the Pharaoh's army. We can't tell for sure.
This is fascinating. So we have the video
split, the water came out. Well, they moved over to the Kadesh Barnea area, and he was told to speak to the rock. But instead, out of basically anger, he struck the rock, and the water came out. And so there's an area about 30 miles southwest of the Dead Sea that Mr. White found that he believes is the Kadesh Barnea site, where you can see a large amount of water erosion coming down the base of the mountain right there. So to get to the site, you have to drive out in the desert there, drive down some rocky roads. And in this first image here, we're getting out of our rental vehicle, or Avis. I'm sorry, Avis. But going down these little rough roads, and we finally got to a stop. We couldn't go any further. And so you walk about 2 miles through the desert to get to this mountainous area.
Okay.
In the distance is the area we'll be taking a look at. But you can see it's rather flat out here. This would have been kind of the area where the children of Israel would have camped. Plenty of level area here. And then this is a site where the water erosion is. You can see someone standing here. To the right of this individual is the site we'll be taking a look at where there's the most water erosion. But this is the site where Moses struck the rock. Now, in the next slide here, we can see a large amount of erosion coming down the mountain. It's eroded away.
Okay.
This rock, I mean, these are large cutouts in the rock caused by a lot of water. This isn't a trickle of water, but a real gully washer coming down here constantly, eroding away the rock into channels. There's actually large channels here as deep as 6 feet going down. And in the distance here in the left, with the individuals next to the stone, that is a baffle rock stone, they call it, where it was approximately 6 feet deep there, the channel that was being cut out, and the children of Israel stuck this rock down in the channel to force the water out, to spread out the water, basically.
Okay. Like a dam, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here you can see the eroded areas.
Still some pools there?
Yeah, these are deep. Apparently there had been a light recent rain here in this particular case when we were there. And again, you can see more of the eroded areas of the rock, more evidence of a large amount of water creating these deep channels coming down. And here we're looking down the side of the rock here, more of the deep channels.
So is this recognized by anyone as being this site?
It's not officially recognized. Again, this is one of the discoveries that's not recognized by the majority. And the next slide here, we see the deep channel, about 6 feet deep, where the baffle rock was placed in here, strategically placed. It's a wedge-shaped rock, forced straight down in there. And then here's the back side of it. You can see again.
Oh, that is a massive stone when you see it from that angle.
It's very large, and it's wedged vertically in there, like it was placed by the human hand in some way or another.
Yeah.
So, and just above this, we'll take a look to the right of this, but again, you can see the baffle rock, and then where the water would have run downhill out into the encampment to give refreshing water to the children of Israel.
Now, have there been any artifacts found out there, like some pottery and things?
Well, Ron White did find some pottery, grinding millstone out there. So artifacts have been found in the encampment area.
So regardless of what you want to believe, people did live there at some point.
Yes, there's evidence, yes. And using Ron's subsurface interface radar and gold detecting equipment, he did find an area where he was getting a reading for gold, where some of the people could have been buried in that encampment area.
Oh, so this so they wore their gold, and so this is a cemetery. After they were buried, they wore their gold to their death.
So some were buried with their gold. So again, this is a distant view. We can see way out in the valley there, and just above this site, above where the baffle rock is, we can see an area, and this spot, this is probably 40 feet from the baffle rock. And this area here, this appears to have been the area of the source of the water that was coming out. And here you can see the exact hole. It appears that water was shooting out of this hole and running downhill. And you can see the water here. The rocks here have been worn smooth. But so that's the Kadesh Barnea that Ron Wyatt believes is the real site of the event where Moses sinned.
The second striking of the rock.
The second,
A
yes.
different location.
Yes.
Interesting. All
Right.
right. All right, well, we're going to get into Mount Sinai now. We have another interesting presentation here, Kevin, so tell us about Mount Sinai.
So this is a photo taken in Saudi Arabia looking back across over to Egypt. This would be a sunset photo. You can see the nice palm trees here in the foreground. But some people are probably asking, why are you over in Saudi Arabia? The reason we're in Saudi Arabia, as we can see on the map here, is because the Red Sea crossing that we saw earlier is found at the Nuweiba Beach in the Sinai Peninsula, and it's in the Gulf of Aqaba. And Midian is where Mount Sinai should be. Midian is in Saudi Arabia, near the mountain here, Mount Sinai. All maps that are historically accurate will show Midian over here in this area of Saudi Arabia. Midian is where Moses fled to escape the punishment of killing the Egyptian. And 40 years later, he was at the mountain of God. And
Because you will worship me on this mountain.
yes, he was to bring the children of Israel back to this mountain, the fire incident with the burning bush. So he was in Midian at that point, and he was to bring the people back to that location. So we want to be looking in Saudi Arabia. So
You know what I find interesting too is even though Ron Wyatt and Michael Rood and others say it's here, they're not the only ones. You have on your website some other quotes from some very knowledgeable and notable people.
Yes.
For example, Dr. Roy Knutson, he's a professor of biblical archaeology, says the visible evidence is quite overwhelming that the location of the true Mount Sinai has been discovered in Saudi Arabia.
yes.
Herschel Shanks, you mentioned Herschel Shanks to me when we were talking before the program. He says Jabal al-Laz is most likely the site for Mount Sinai. And then Dr. Dean McKenzie, who is a professor emeritus at the University of Oregon, says the evidence points to northwest Saudi Arabia as the location of the actual Mount Sinai.
Yeah, so there are, quote, authorities out there that are agreeing, yes, this is the correct mountain. And this is the place where he crossed the border in 1984 on foot from Jordan into Saudi Arabia, he and his sons, and they walked through the desert. It was a very strenuous hike for them, and that's when he was taken prisoner, supposedly, being accused of being an Israeli spy. But Ron Wyatt found this mountain there, and he asked the locals, and the locals said, Jebel Musa Hena, or the Mountain of Moses is here. And so you've got a local tradition out there that, yes, this is the Mountain of Moses. And of course, they do respect Moses, the Muslims do.
Now there's two names there, Jabal al-Laz and Jebel Musa?
Yeah, Jebel Musa Hena, they call it the
Musa Hena.
Mountain of Moses.
Okay.
Yeah, is what they call
And we're
it.
talking about the same place?
Yes, same
mountain.
place, same
Okay.
as Jebel al-Laz, yes. And so here is the beach on the Saudi Arabian side of the crossing site there.
Where the Israelites came over,
Yes.
from Nuweiba.
And that's where we saw in the previous segment where the chariot wheel was found.
Ah, okay.
In these waters here, so this is a continuation of the crossing site. And so from the beach area, you can also see where the column was cut down. The column that had the writing on it, death, Mizraim, Pharaoh, Yahweh, Solomon, water. So this was a column marking the spot for the Red Sea crossing. The authorities cut it down and took it someplace. We don't know where it is.
And what's interesting, there's two columns, and people might say, oh, well, that's just each culture had their own traditions of raising columns for this and that. But these are matching columns. They're the same granite.
Yes, they're from opposite sides of the crossing site, strategically placed, and then you have the chariot parts in these same waters. So they were placed there on purpose, for a reason. Pillars were used, in ancient times to mark places or events. And so, we can trust these columns in this particular case. Solomon's Seaport was just to the north. He knew of this area, what was going on here. So in our next slide here, We can see Tim Mahony in the foreground, and in the background, you can see the split rock, the first split rock.
Yes, okay.
So we went for the second one, back to the first one here. And of course, Tim Mahony, he is with the website patternsofevidence.com. They're putting together a documentary on this and the Red Sea crossing. But you can see in the distance the split rock on top of a 300-foot tall hill. The split rock is 50 feet in height. It's a very prominent rock. Now in Numbers 20:11, and Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. So God provided for them. He gave them provision. And
Water for 1 million people.
Yes.
And probably several million
yes,
animals.
probably 3 million people, yeah, plus their livestock. So some people have been able to make it over there. The country is closed. You cannot get a tourist visa. So to get into the country is very difficult. And then getting out to the site, you have to have permits usually just to get to that area. But here you can see the split rock where you can see a large amount of water erosion. A large amount of water erosion coming down from the rock. In the foreground here, you can see channels being cut into the rock. The water has eroded the rock to a smooth surface here.
And this is the rock that in modern Western times that Jim and Penny Caldwell, I mean the Bedouin have always known this is here, but this is where Jim and Penny Caldwell discovered this one.
Yes. After Ron discovered the mountain, Jim and Penny went out there and they also found this rock. So very, very large rock. The split in the rock is so large you can actually walk through it. You know, and a large amount of water erosion inside the rock itself. Here you can see how it stands out prominently above the peak there. And so here you can see the split in the rock where a person could walk through it. When God split it, it sure split, and then the water erosion coming up out of there, spewing up, it created more space probably in the rock, eroding it away. And you can see water erosion coming down from the rock.
Yeah, and even if you saw this and you were a skeptic and said, well, that rock has always been split, it's just it's a natural outcropping, and that erosion is wind erosion, well, you're not going to have wind erosion flowing down in a pattern similar to what water would create.
Yes, this is definitely water erosion coming down. Again, this is a desert area, very little rainfall at all out here, and yet all this water erosion you can see on the rocks coming down from this giant split rock. So God did provide water for them lovingly, even though they were impatient and rebellious, kind of like us, I guess.
Aren't we all? Yes.
Yeah. So in our next slide, you can see Ross Patterson. He's standing next to the split there in the rock.
Now, those who are not familiar with Ross Patterson, who is he in relation to all of this?
He's a friend of mine in New Zealand who also promotes Ron Wyatt's work.
Oh, very good.
Presentations, and he was able to make it out there. And so our next slide, we can see the altar Jehovah Nissi in the foreground. And in the background, we can see the split rock once again standing up. Very prominent rock in the background. And
so this is an altar of some kind.
This mentioned in the Bible, yes, this altar. So again, this is matching the biblical account once again. And there's also some circular rock formations. I don't know if they held the bottoms of the tents down or something, but you see some round rock formations where the children of Israel were encamped in this area.
That's similar to what we find in North America with the Cherokee Indians and such across the country, that in certain areas where they would camp, there's these circles where their tents were.
Okay, yeah.
At different times of the year, yeah.
Sure, yeah. So over on the other side of the mountain is the front of Mount Sinai, and you can see in the distance the blackened peak of the mountain. Once again, the Bible says that the mountain was a smoke. It was on fire. And so the mountaintop here is blackened. When you walk up to the top of the mountain, several people have, you turn the stone over, the top of it's black, the bottom of it is brown.
Really?
So there's evidence that it was burned on top, and the natural color is on the bottom, and it's brown.
Now that answers a question I was going to ask, and you've already answered it, because I have heard a secondary theory that this is just a different type of rock. It's a black rock that happens to have this line right at a certain point near the peak.
Yeah, but that's not the case. Yeah, this is a burned mountaintop because underneath it, it is brown material. So it's actually a day hike to make it to the top of the mountain and to make it back down. Strenuous walk. But people have been up there and they've seen the blackened, burned.
And that is the tallest mountain in the area.
It is. The upper 2/3 of Saudi Arabia is the tallest of mountains, and that's another clue that ancient historians have said that it was the tallest of mountains in Midian, and that's what it is.
Here it is from Josephus. We were just looking at that now. Josephus said that Mount Sinai was the highest of mountains in the city of Midian, which is just outside of Al-Bad.
Yes, Al-Bad is 15 miles to the south.
Okay.
And Al-Bad is where Jethro is from. On some maps, you'll see the name Jethro next to Al-Bad. And the caves of Moses are there also at Al-Bad.
And also Philo said that Mount Sinai was located east of the Sinai Peninsula and south of Palestine, which puts it again in this vicinity.
Again, we're in the correct location. So you have all these ancient historians identifying the site, and you have the Bible saying Mount Sinai in Arabia, Galatians 4. So it's pretty incredible. It's been lost for so many millennia, and yet here it is coming out near the end of time for a demonstration of truth for mankind. So Exodus 19, and Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. My friend Aaron Sin was out there around 2003 with Tim Mahony, and again you can see the blackened peak in the background, and at the base of the mountain, we'll see a little bit later, is the remains of an altar. Once again, fitting the biblical account. You can see a guardhouse on the right edge of this photo. They put a fence around the front of the mountain and a guardhouse and a sign telling people to stay away. This is an archaeological area. So the Saudi authorities are recognizing this as an archaeological site.
Well, having put that much effort into it, they know.
Yes.
They know darn well what this is.
Sure. And then another photo here from a distance further back to the mountain. You can see, again, the encampment area, and the left side of the photo in the distance, that's an area where Elijah's cave is. And here in the very center of the photo is Elijah's cave. It's in a shadow, but it's in kind of the very center of the photo here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can see it there.
Yeah. And he, Elijah, arose, he did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God, and he came thither unto a cave and lodged there. 1 Kings 19.
Now, how many people would catch on to that this is the same? Because we hear of Elijah's cave, but normally you wouldn't tie the two together. You wouldn't stop at Mount Horeb. Oh, yes, that's right. This is the same place. It's funny that it's just all in the same area.
Everything matches here, the biblical account. And this is taken from inside the cave, and we're looking out into the valley below. This is quite a photograph here.
Wow. Now, there in the photo you can see that's the Saudi government's buildings, is it not?
Well, actually those are Bedouin buildings out in the far distance. But just in front of that, toward the mountain a little bit, is the fencing they put up, the Saudi authorities, to keep people out.
And there's all kinds of things down there. There's even a modified corral of types.
There is, remains of an altar, remains of pillars at the base of the mountain. Here's another photo of the cave. It's not real deep, but nevertheless it is something to provide shelter from the rain and so forth. Now, Google Earth, you can look about 20 miles southwest of here, and you can see Elam. Elam was where there were 12 wells and 70 palm trees, we're told. And if you go there today, there's still 12 wells at this site.
So this is no doubt Elam.
Yes. So this is, again, confirmation we're in the right area. And
it's on the right trail. It's on the way, is it not?
Yes, it is. Right. And so we're back at Mount Sinai again, and Ross Patterson is pointing to a spot in the distance. This is where the golden calf incident took place. We're going to see that shortly. But this will give you an idea of how Moses is coming down the mountain, and he could have seen the dancing and the apostasy taking place. And of course, his anger became hot, righteous indignation against the apostasy of the people. In Exodus 32, and it came to pass as soon as he came nigh into the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands and brake them beneath the mount. So that's what he saw. And here we can see, this is an aerial view of the large rocks where the golden calf was placed on top of this. The Saudi authorities, they have placed a fence around this once again, and there's a sign saying this is an archaeological area. Stay out.
And the clue is that there are paintings on the side that are not indicative of that area, are they?
That's right. You've been there, I guess.
I've seen photographs.
Okay. Yeah. So here we are. This is a closer shot of it. And on the sides of this, as you say, there are inscriptions of the Apis bull and so forth on the side of this from Egypt. So they came from Egypt. They're accustomed to this, Egyptian bull designs and so forth. And here Ross is next to one of them.
And that is not native to that area.
Right,
That's the key.
The Saudi locals, do not draw this type of Egyptian drawing on the rocks, in their area. So this is something brought over from Egypt, these designs and so forth. So, and then Ross is next to some other carvings here, more bulls and calves, and you see a camel and so forth. So a lot more inscriptions here showing people were here, and again it's tied back to Egypt.
Now, how long ago was this that you could get that close to this? Because you can't do that anymore.
Right, you can't get a tourist visa. You have to get some sort of special permission from the government. You can't just send in an application for a tourist visa. You have to get a special permit, and that's extremely difficult.
And you would have to hop the fence now too to get this kind of photograph.
Yes, to get inside some of these areas, you can go around the fence. Some of them have, but of course they're not damaging anything. They're keeping everything pristine. So, and here's some more drawings. Ross is next to. This is out in the encampment area.
Oh, so this is not at the altar itself. There are more of these.
These are a little bit away from the actual golden calf altar. These right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then this is Dr. Kim, who was out there, went out there 12 times. He worked for the Saudi prince, and he found numerous drawings out here also. He also found these artifacts, incredible amount of pottery and so forth in the encampment area.
And he was, wasn't he a personal physician to the king? He was
to one of the princes, yes. And then he found, if you can see here, the arrow's pointing to a menorah. He found an inscription of a menorah where it was actually made there, Mount Sinai, the golden candlestick. So this is where it was made, and this is the oldest image ever of the menorah or golden candlestick.
And again,
found it there.
Even if you were to argue that, what would a Hebrew inscription be doing in the middle of a Muslim Arab country?
Exactly, yeah. This is showing the Jewish roots of these drawings out there and of the people that were there. And then Ron Wyatt found this millstone in the encampment area. Once again, evidence of the people occupying, and this would have been used with manna, grinding up the manna. So this is, a manna stone, so to speak.
Wow, absolutely amazing. Well, you know what, we're going to have to cut it short, Kevin, but you know what, we're going to come back. We're going to come back because we have a lot more to talk.
I just want to wrap things up here by revisiting some of the key points from the films, some of the artifacts that were shown. And the first thing here, the Wadi Wadir, where God brought the Israelites through. As you could clearly see, the natural formation of the mountain and how there was a channel cutting through the entire mountain region, right exactly to the beach, where the beach itself could hold 3 million people. The next thing, the rock that was split when Moses tapped it and the water flowed through. Clearly see water erosion, clearly see that there was water gushing in the middle of a desert. Next, we have the altar where the golden calf sat upon, and the pictographs etched upon the altar. Next, we have this carved pillar that they spoke about. They didn't show it in there, but this is an actual picture of one of the pillars used to support the tabernacle in the wilderness there. Next, we have a pictograph of sheep, following more pictographs around near the altar. Mount Sinai, the top, definitely shows burning. The Pillar of Solomon on the Israeli side, and of course on the Arab side, it was cut down to eliminate any proof of the crossing. Next, coral encrusted wheels, the chariot wheels from Pharaoh's army at the bottom, and finally another shot of a chariot wheel at the bottom of the Red Sea. I'd like to conclude by saying that I don't believe it's just historians and archaeologists debating over time and dates and things like that. I truly believe there's been a conspiracy to eliminate and hide history and the truth, and also to debunk God. The powers to be want to eliminate God as the ultimate authority in this universe, and they want to make themselves gods. That's why we have the Illuminati, the Bilderbergs, the Masons, and all the other secret societies that all the people in place and power belong to. We're ultimately controlled by Satan himself. It's only my second one. Pardon the terrible audio. I'll be working on that. I'll also be working on making my films better and better as I go along. If you like it, please subscribe. And thank you for watching. And God bless all of you.